Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to Imagine Podcast's new season. You better get the John Williams soundtrack playing and the opening crawl moving because today we are talking about Star Wars. My name is Alexander, producer of Imagine Podcast. We're looking forward to a great new season of discussions of all sorts of fictional works. And really looking forward to having a lot of great discussions with our awesome co-hosts here, including three awesome guys with me today. So again, my name is Alexander. I'm from the United States, and I am a writer.
Hey guys, I'm Adam. I'm from Dublin, Ireland, and I've been a fan of Star Wars since 1997.
Good day to you, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Kurt. I am from the UK, and I've been a fan of Star Wars probably since the late 90s.
Hello, everyone. Damian Caps here, filmmaker and avid moviegoer. Big fan of Star Wars. Don't remember when I first saw it, but probably since 1995 when I was born.
So Star Wars is a great way to launch our new season because it's such an iconic film franchise, and of course it's expanded beyond just movies into uh, all sorts of different properties, from toys to TV series to books and whatnot. And Star Wars is something that a lot of fans get really passionate about, as you'll probably hear from us in just a few minutes. And I think I was thinking like we can start talking like why this franchise is so highly revered and why sometimes the decisions that are made regarding it by those in charge can upset and disappoint so many fans. And at least for me, I think what makes Star Wars so enduring is, well, first of all, it's really creative. And by creative, I don't just mean that it's really imaginative and it's super special and unique, which of course it is, but also George Lucas and the other guys, when they were coming up with the original, they the original trilogy, I should say, they combined so many classic elements of literature into one kind of movie. Like they took themes from Japanese samurai films, including the Akira Kurosawa films. They took themes from Western films, which you can see in Han Solo and a lot of the scenes involving him as well. They took elements from even The Wizard of Oz. They took elements from Eastern spirituality and philosophy. They took, of course, sci-fi elements, kind of obvious, and they took a lot of elements from politics and history. There's a lot of stuff like a lot of parallels with the Roman Empire and whatnot, and it's just it really makes for a really interesting mix. And I think that's, at least for me, what makes Star Wars so creative and interesting, is just how they combine all of these elements, and then it somehow, even though it is a combination of these various elements, it somehow feels totally different and compared to everything else. So it's a really interesting franchise. What do you guys think?
For me, Star Wars has always been like like the journey, like a great big journey for all the characters involved. First, it started with Luke Skywalker and his journey to become a Jedi, and it's always it has like this like there is this grand design around it, that there are all these different people, all these different characters, and that encompass this universe, and they all like have this just this general idea of striking back or to having hope against an oppressive empire, or just keeping the peace in the galaxy. It's just this. It has all these great characters that have become iconic. Everybody knows who Darth Vader is, and he's like the big villain of the story. But he's also like one of the most compelling characters in all of fiction, as he, you know, you see him as this as this evil oppressive force, but then you realize there's more to this character, and that goes for every character in their story. Han Solo, he seems like a selfish jerk at the beginning, but then, you know, when the time comes, he does make the right decision at the right time. Like, so it just shows like there are layers to all these different characters, and sometimes they might go in places that we never expect, or sometimes we don't want. But that's just how it is. I think people just see like these people aren't just characters, but they're also living like these long lives, because this series has gone on for so long. We do go and see how these characters change, and you know, I just think it's interesting to look at what has come before and what's come and what they're doing with it now. And you know, I still like really like the expanded lore as well. I mean, I like the books and comics that they make as well. It's just a great uh like a great like galaxy of characters, and I just like seeing how it's evolved over time. And I think, you know, it can still change. I mean, there are a lot of people behind it that I do generally respect, and who generally respect this series. And I just want to see what they do going forward with what's out now. But anyway, that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, I really love Star Wars, and when they were first producing the original Star Wars back in the 70s, but before it was released, they thought it was going to be a complete failure in the box office, and it ended up being a huge success. And I think part of that is because it Star Wars is a combination of the new and the old. It takes the old from its Western themes, the idea of a character seeking out revenge or going on a journey to defeat a certain bad guy, and just traveling throughout this vast open landscape, whether it be out in the West or in the galaxy in Star Wars. And it combines that with the exciting new idea of sci-fi in cinema, that we could finally see like these spaceships and these wondrous planets and alien creatures on the big screen. And I think just the combination of those two things together help draw in the crowds and mesmerize them and help them enjoy it while watching it in the cinema. And just as the films grew throughout the decades, so did the characters. And throughout the decades, that's when the characters really grew. And when we became attached to them we became really attached to them because we've known them for so long, as you were saying, Adam. And I think that's really why Star Wars gained in popularity so quickly and has maintained popularity for so long. It hooked us with the ideas, the stories, and we've stayed engaged through its characters and through its worlds.
Yeah, well, for me, I was introduced to Star Wars via my dad in the late 90s. And the funny thing is, I honestly wouldn't be able to tell you exactly how or when I became like a big fan of this franchise. It's just that, as soon as you see Star Wars, especially as a kid, you just find that you're engrossed in this world because of the characters, the stories, and it's just so unique, especially back in the 90s, back then before obviously, the sci-fi films took off in the way in which they did with the newer special effects and all that sort of stuff. There was nothing like it back in the 70s, and still in the 90s. Was it how many years later after Return of the Jedi, it still was this really unique and interesting world, and it's all interesting characters and stuff like that. And for was it the pure, like, was it Star Wars fanatics, these people are very, very attached to this franchise. Like I said before, it's very unique. So when you have different creative heads, like, is it taking on the franchise how many years later and trying to take this franchise forward or in different directions, obviously you're going to get protective of that kind of thing, just because the fans, they believe that under the original control of like whoever created it, it was just like, okay, this is that kind of thing and it shouldn't be tampered with. But as with lots of long running franchises, there are like, as it changes in like the creative side of things. And Star Wars, I think, is enjoyed for so long just because it was such a wonderful and interesting concept, and everyone has always wanted to see what happened next. It was just a case of when. And I love it just because of like the creatures and the characters and the space and the different worlds. I'm not like, a super crazy fan about Star Wars. I found out, especially after I think was it maybe Rogue One came out, how much of a casual fan I am. But I still adore this franchise a lot, just in the sense that I'm just whenever you get inside the world, it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, I was just thinking, like, the first time I actually ever saw Star Wars was when I was brought, and I saw The Empire Strikes Back when it was brought back to theaters for the special editions leading up to the release of the prequels. And that really was my first Star Wars film, and I actually remember owning that version of Empire on VHS back then, and I watched that. I think I watched that more than any other film that we owned back then. And eventually, I saw the first film, and then saw Return of the Jedi before I saw the prequels. And I actually grew up with the prequels, and I actually really did enjoy Episode 1 when it first came out. I thought it really, and I still enjoy it, even though I know it's some people, there are a lot of problems with that film, or people do have a lot of problems with it. But like I said, it's just one of those films that I enjoyed it when I saw it, and I was probably at the right age for it. Um, and I will say though that I did find Attack of the Clones to be a bit boring, but I couldn't stop talking about Revenge of the Sith for weeks. And that my enthusiasm for Star Wars never really died down from there. I mean, I still played video games. Like, one of my favorite games of all time was Knights of the Old Republic, and uh, I kept playing whatever Star Wars games that came out. I didn't really read any of the books until like much later, but when I did, I realized, oh, there's like all these different stories that's been going on since the films ended. Of course, that's all changed now, but back then, that's all people had, and most of those stories are also carried into video games as well. And I just think that it is something that is always been with me. Like, it's the longest running film series that I've ever kept up with, and it's still going on to this day. I mean, it's definitely different now than it was back then, because we never thought we'd keep getting Star Wars films. I mean, I think people were content with the idea that maybe that we would just get different mediums. I mean, the Clone Wars was the TV show that came out. That was a big step for them, because this before the whole Disney buyout, we never thought we'd get anything more than that. Maybe a few live action TV shows were in development as well. But I just want to see like them explore some of the, like, if they're gonna make films or TV shows, maybe they should start exploring like some of the stories that have only been covered in comics or in novels, because there's some really interesting stuff there. Like, one of my favorite stories from the last era was all about like characters, like was all about the Sith, like Darth Bane or Darth Plagueis. Like, Darth Plagueis is actually one of my favorite novels of all time. I mean, it's such a well told story, and it gives you a clear insight. And actually, it it actually enhanced my enjoyment for Episode 1, because you can see all the threads being laid there to what we'd eventually see during the prequel era. So I actually do enjoy the films more. I like to imagine that kind of story still exists, even if it's not technically canon. It's still a great story, even if it isn't there anymore. But yeah, I still enjoy those stories to this day, and I'll probably keep going back and reading some more Legend stuff and playing some of those games. Like, I've recently replayed KOTOR 2 with all its uh, unreleased content or restored content. Yeah, it's a great game. I mean, I didn't understand it when I played it at first, because stuff was dumbed out. But now playing the whole thing, it's actually a pretty good game, and I still enjoy playing it to this day.
Yeah, seeing a movie about the Sith would be very interesting. I wonder how Disney would would do that. But I mean, as you're saying, you're saying there's so many stories that aren't even shown in the films. There's comic books, video games, books. That's one of the unique things about Star Wars. And I know there are other series that do this as well, but it's not just a series of movies. It's not just individual stories. It's an entire world that has been made. And it's really exciting to see where this world goes, but it's also, with Star Wars, there's a sense of nostalgia, especially those that grew up watching Star Wars. And I think one of the reasons that people have kind of a backlash whenever they try to change things in newer movies is that the more you venture off from the atmosphere, the thematic tones of the old films, the less sense of nostalgia you get. And I think nostalgia sells, and I think that's part of the reason why so many people go back to reboots like Star Wars, Jurassic World, some of the Marvel films. But I think to continue on with the franchise and to help grow a world, you have to change things a little bit. You know, you can't just say the same things over and over and over again. So I think there has to be change. You just have to do it in the right way with the same kind of similar tones to the older films. Keep the spirit alive.
That is wonderfully worded, Damien. For me, like you, Adam, I grew up with the prequels. I had, I guess, a greater attachment to the prequels just because they were new. I saw them all in the cinema, and I had first proper hand experience as opposed to seeing, like, was it the older Star Wars films on in the cinema, which I saw on VHS. Funnily enough, before like Revenge of the Sith came out, I rewatched all of the older films when they'd been re-released on VHS with the enhancements on there, and it gave me a greater love for those films. And it's funny, between the time that Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith came out, like Return of the Jedi ended up becoming my favorite film of the series. And I think, was it my love for that film, like, definitely got enhanced by like learning about what they did with the prequel films. And yeah, I understand these days the prequel films don't have as much backlash as they used to, but people still like to take a dump on them. But I like Phantom Menace. Attack of the Clones is an unintentional joke to me because like some of the quotes in there I find completely hilarious. And Revenge of the Sith I still find like quite entertaining. And just jump off of what you were saying, Damien, beforehand. Yes, nostalgia is a very powerful thing when it comes to Star Wars. I think that's why obviously The Force Awakens came out in the way in which it did. But obviously we'll jump onto that topic when we get to that later on. But yeah, nostalgia is just one of the sort of powerful things that obviously the companies involved when making these films definitely try to tap into, because they know that's one of the most powerful elements that will get people back into the cinema. And Star Wars is one of those really unique and fantastic properties that just creates such a wonderful world full of mythology and just minor details that even just the smallest character in the background could have their own story about them. And obviously that kind of stuff has been done in the expanded universe / legend space material now. And I've always wanted to see films based on planets in the Outer Rim, or like you said, the Sith-based stuff, because learning about the Rule of Two, seeing what like Sith-based characters existed before, like say Darth Maul and the Emperor and Darth Vader and all that sort of stuff. There's so many other characters that I've heard about in like the Legends-based material, but I just was never a fan that much to go about and look into it. But to bring that stuff into the fold now and then put it into film would be great. But like you said, Disney is a company that's trying to get like the general audience in, and they would probably have to tread very carefully when trying to introduce a more darker element. But I would love to see more from Star Wars, because as much as I love seeing the familiar cast and worlds that we're used to, I would love to just expand out and see what goes on beyond that, really.
So, of course, as we have already mentioned, Disney purchased Lucasfilms, acquired it in 2012, and then all sorts of new projects were announced, and we have the sequel trilogy that's been coming out. We have spin-off films, or standalone films, I should say, and now we have this announced Rian Johnson trilogy, which now it seems like there's going to be a different trilogy done by the creators of Game of Thrones. So a lot is changing in this franchise. It used to be simpler in the sense that we had the original trilogy, then a long break, and then 1999 Phantom Menace comes out, and to all of the Star Wars fans who were waiting, it was a much anticipated film with better, newer technology to allow it to be more modern and whatnot. And of course, we had the prequel trilogy. Then we had Clone Wars, the TV series, and the franchise was going on pretty strong, the video games. But then, like, Disney's uh, takeover of Lucasfilms really changed things up. And so, what do you guys think about how the franchise has been faring in this new Disney era? Do you guys think it's going well, or that perhaps it's actually hurt the franchise, like some fans have suggested, or perhaps something in between?
I think this needs to be a more open discussion in regards to that. I mean, I'm not just cool with just saying, you know, everything's bad now. Like, here's the thing. I'll let you know where I was at when I was going into this whole Disney thing. I was a little disappointed when I heard that the expanded universe was being removed, but I understand why they did it, because there was just too much baggage there. There was just too much going on, and you couldn't really introduce that all to the casual fans or like any moviegoers in general. Like, all of a sudden, Luke has this Jedi Order and he's met all these different people, and like trying to just incorporate it all just wouldn't work. So I understand why they did that. It's a tough pill, but it's one that makes sense. I just really hoped that they would take the elements of those stories that were good. Like I said, I still read Darth Plagueis every now and then because it's still a great story. And I don't really think they need to change that much unless they feel that they have this better story to tell, or they have a better way of incorporating that story. It still works for the current canon anyway. You might have a few tidbits that might not align, but apart from that, it's still great. As far as where they're going with the films, I'll make it clear. Like, I genuinely did enjoy The Force Awakens. I mean, there obviously was so much hype around that film, just like there was hype around The Phantom Menace. But like we said about nostalgia, this film is built completely on nostalgia. There's just so much of the past films in there that people are saying, yeah, it's basically a remake of all those films. But I think that was the point, because people wanted to know that this was genuine Star Wars, that they're not just going to have something that's going to radically departure from what people have expected, and just say that, oh yeah, this happens to take place in the Star Wars universe. It's just a different story. Yes, it's the Star Wars universe, and there are some characters there to connect with the old with the new. And I did enjoy that film when it came out, and I could still enjoy it even now. But in terms of like what they're doing with all the other properties, like I'll tell you what, I think them handing all the Star Wars games to EA was a massive mistake, because it has done the Star Wars license no favors, considering that all we've gotten so far is Battlefront 1 and 2, and we've already had a Battlefront 1 and 2, which people are probably playing the original Battlefront 2 more now because of people are burned. Like, I played Battlefront 2, the EA version, and I didn't like. I enjoyed the flying in that game. I really did, and I felt I could get into it, but I couldn't deal with the grind. I couldn't deal with the fact that that game had just too much. Like, having to earn credits was based on time played instead of actual skill. So that really turned that off for me, and I didn't even play it after the game launched. And in terms of the films that came after, like the spin-off films, like I said, I like the idea that we're getting that we would be getting films on stories we typically would be relegated to novels. I mean, we wouldn't normally see these films because it's always been about the Skywalker saga, but now, like, we're having films that are not about that. So I thought Rogue One was a good start because, once again, it's nostalgia. It's nostalgia for the first film, for the original film. And yeah, some people might have issues like with Tarkin's face and all that, but I didn't see how that film would work if you didn't have Tarkin in it, and you know you can't resurrect Peter Cushing, so you got to do the next best thing. But yeah, I thought I genuinely enjoyed that film, and you know I was still buying Star Wars books, all the new ones. I've read most of them. There's just a couple I haven't finished reading yet, but you know I've kind of slowed down a bit because of the stuff that's happened with The Last Jedi. I mean, and that's really the ultimate problem that I think they're facing here is that they said they're telling us like The Last Jedi tells us that nostalgia is bad and we have to get rid of it, and they change so much. They even change elements of the last film as if we didn't remember what happened in that film, and I just don't understand why they went that way. It didn't do them any favors, and I'm not really sure where they're going with this. In terms of Kathleen Kennedy, I don't really know much about her. But but it seems as though like she's just letting like whoever make these stories without any real say in the story, and like that's not really a way to push forward. I mean, like sure, she might be a great like movie producer, like you said, like that's why she's probably still working there, why she's got a contract extended. I mean, she already had all those major successes beforehand, but I think it's more to do with the fact that I think right now there isn't really anyone who's pushing to take over. And people are saying, you know, the fandom has gotten really bad or something. No, I think it's just more about how people have responded to the fandom, and you know it's just been a constant back and forth, and it's not really doing them any favors to just keep at it. Sometimes when things don't go right, you have to take some form of responsibility. Like to take no responsibility and give no credit to the people who pointed out these flaws, that that's just not gonna do anyone any favors, and it's only going to make the brand suffer as a result. I do want things to get better, but it's just hard to think that when they're not like taking on the criticism like they should. You can't just say, "Oh, criticism is bad because of this." Like criticism is criticism. You have to just accept that criticism and move forward with it. Otherwise, what's the point?
Money talks, and I think you have a situation where, to an extent, greed is fueling a lot of the decisions as much as creativity is.
Yeah, Disney is a movie factory. If they have a chance to make money, they will keep pushing out films until they run the franchise into the ground. And that can be a good thing and a bad thing. It can be a good thing in the sense that we get more Star Wars films, but it can be a bad thing in the sense that they'll as long as the general audience likes it, or at least they don't even have to like it as long as they pay to go see it in theaters, then they'll keep producing films regardless of what direction the story goes in. I like that we're getting new Star Wars films. Yeah, I like that Disney has bought Lucasfilms because we're getting new Star Wars films. If they didn't, we probably wouldn't be getting any new films. I enjoyed The Force Awakens. I didn't think anything was terribly wrong with it. I loved Rogue One. I thought Rogue One, out of all of the new films, has the most well-rounded story. It has, as you were saying, Adam, about nostalgia, it brings perfectly that sense of nostalgia from the original Star Wars films. Everything from the extras haircuts. They made sure that every single outfit and haircut in that film was accurate to the original Star Wars, and the haircuts were accurate to the 70s like they did back then. Solo was pretty good. It felt less like a Star Wars film and more like just kind of like, I want to say Fast and Furious, but if Fast and Furious and Star Wars had a baby, I feel like that would be a Solo Star Wars story. But The Last Jedi, I feel like had so much potential. There were so many moments in it that I loved. Spoiler alert. So many moments like when they went into light speed and went through the cruiser, the Sith cruiser. What was her name?
Holdo.
Yeah, General Holdo, she went into Lightspeed through the cruiser. That all the moments leading up to that, some of the fight scenes, the opening fight scenes with the bombs, was done spectacularly. But there were so many dramatic moments in that film that I don't know if it was the script, the direction, or the studio wanting to put it in. But so many moments were ruined by comedy and just wanting to put in funny slapstick moments. Like in the end when one second, sorry, lost my train of thought there.
I think you're thinking of the word like bathos.
Okay.
That's like an extreme serious to extreme comedy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there was just way too many of those. I mean, let's start with Luke throwing the lightsaber and then just like all the 2 years of waiting for that.
Oh yeah, definitely. And in the end, when Luke came in and saw Leia at the end, his ghost, their just whole conversation, him throwing in the jokes about her hair, the interaction between Holdo and Leia before she went off to go on the cruiser, them like interrupting each other and giggling, like, may the force be with you always. Like, it was supposed to be cute and like dramatic and emotional, but it felt like bad writing to me. I feel like overall as a story, it had a lot of potential and was really good. It's just there's a lot of little details in there that were thrown in that just ruined so many pivotal moments. And for me, that makes it less, it makes the film not as good.
I'll also say one thing about that part with Luke is that you'll notice he's not a Jedi, but yet he's wearing his Jedi robes at the beginning. I always found that was weird, but I think that was because, you know, that's how he looked at the end of The Force Awakens. So he just had to be in those robes. And then, you know, he just took them off as soon as the scene ended. I thought that was odd.
Do you think that could be because they weren't entirely sure which script they were going to go with when they finished The Force Awakens?
Oh, they did have a script. It was just thrown out. Like, if you believe what Daisy Ridley said about Rian Johnson, I do believe that Luke was supposed to be a Jedi. I think there were supposed to be rocks floating around him at the end of that film, but then Johnson asked him to not do that, and then they just say no, he's not a Jedi. I think that was the problem. Or I mean, you know, that's why I say there are things that from the last film that don't really fit with this one. You just have two conflicting stories going on in the same series of films.
And I think that can be a case where a film has been overproduced in the sense that the studio decides to take the film in another direction because they think that will sell better based on the last film, rather than what would make sense through the story.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. All right, just to add my 2 cents to this, going off of what you guys said beforehand, the Star Wars franchise, obviously, after The Force Awakens came out, made a ridiculous amount of money. And obviously, that was through the power of nostalgia, really good marketing, and the fact that obviously we hadn't had a Star Wars film at that point for 10 years. And it was bringing back the nostalgia in a really heavy way with the original characters, the original themes that were used in the trailers, which definitely got me. And I remember watching The Force Awakens with a friend of mine in IMAX, and we were just saying, I just hope it's good. And for me, I really enjoyed the film at the time. It didn't blow me away, but literally all it gave me was just that feeling of being in Star Wars, in the sense that, you know, it felt like the classic films. And what I think the Force Awakens did really well was it was able to capture the nostalgia, but also create a new sort of you know, nice like little base for the new character to jump off from. You know, you had like, you know, Rey, Finn, and Poe, these interesting new characters that had just enough, like, you know, was it a character development, screen time, and unique quirks about them that you could latch onto these characters as, like, you know, was it new people to you know, explore the galaxy with, as the, you know, changing of the baton with, you know, the new trilogy. I liked the way the film looked. It was really fun. And though the John Williams score, which is something I always follow in films, like I'm a big, like, massive fan of film scores, while it wasn't as powerful as some of his previous work, I feel like some of the new themes that he did introduce to this new film was pretty good. in recent years, The Force Awakens, my love for it has gone down a little bit. It's just because, like, I think just the nostalgia and the happiness I felt about having Star Wars back in my life again was just so high, but it's definitely sort of slided down in recent years. But Rogue One, like you, Damien, I loved that movie. I wasn't sure what to expect. I knew that having it take place in between like episodes 3 and 4 was, an interesting time, but for them to take such a small detail and then bring it into like a full-fledged film with interesting characters, an interesting story, such a great sense of scope, the most awesome action sequences in any of the Star Wars films, especially the Vader sequence. Everybody that I know talks about that sequence like it is like, one of the best things in cinematic history. And to me, it actually is. It's a beautiful sequence of horror in, in the best way possible. And was it The Last Jedi? That's where things start to get interesting. Because when I saw that film the first time, I thought it was very bold, very interesting, and it was an interesting risk take for this, for the franchise to go about and just almost throw everything about the franchise out, and then just go in this bold new direction. And as much as I like Ryan Johnson as a filmmaker, like I like what he did with Breaking Bad, and if you've seen Looper, you know that he is definitely a competent, as a director who is able to create really interesting things, especially in the world of sci-fi. I feel like him, along with the people at Lucasfilm, just decided to do the wrong thing. The decision that they made with The Last Jedi definitely would have helped with a spin-off film as opposed to one of the mainline series, because the main series has this wonderful balance between nostalgia and introducing new elements. And I feel like riding that line, going ahead, is the only way that this franchise could survive long term. And just veering too far to the right and going into this new direction with a franchise that people are very passionate about, and I don't think they thought of the ramification that was going to, incur after that. And while, like you said, Damien, there's some really wonderful and interesting things that they did with the movie, with with Holdo, and like that moment with the hyperdrive, and some of the action sequences were really beautiful, and some of the way in which just certain scenes were set up was wonderful. There was just some things done strangely with the dialogue. I think was it the first moment in the film where I was just a bit like, what? Was when Poe was talking to Hux, and he made that joke about like the mum joke, and I'm like, is this really in a Star Wars film? It seems far too real to be in a Star Wars film. It just felt really bizarre. And there's just so many things about the film that if you'd made several different changes here, there, and everywhere, it wouldn't have been as divisive as it was. And the strange thing is, because of The Last Jedi, along with obviously what happened with the Battlefront games as well, the Star Wars franchise is in like a not so good place with the fan base right now. And it's even prevented people from watching Solo. And obviously there were people that were, already making their minds up about Solo before the film had even come out. And there was still some people that saw the film and said it was, not for them. I thought Solo's, much better than I expected, considering like the lack of anticipation behind it. It was just an interesting heist kind of movie that answered a few questions. Alden Ehrenreich did a good job as Solo, and I think was it seeing the connection between him and Chewie, some of the stuff going on with Lando, and the cameo from one of those Star Wars characters, which I won't spoil here, but for me, I was just like, oh wow, that's actually pretty good, especially if you'd seen Rebels as well. That connection to that character was just really fun. I think the Star Wars franchise right now has produced two really good movies, a pretty decent one, and a not so good one, and it's all about the money right now. Disney know how much this franchise can make for them, and they are almost milking it dry, which is very troubling at the same time, because Star Wars is not a consistent thing that needs to be done so often. You need that breathing room just to let the franchise do what it does, chill, and then bring it back out when it's ready, and not have so much studio meddling and changing things for the sake of change.
I just want to say my tidbit on Solo. I think it came out too soon. I think coming out just 6 months after The Last Jedi, in fact, like 5 months after, if I actually, because breaking that mold probably wasn't a good idea, and it only lengthens the wait for Episode 9 as well. I mean, I don't think people were just expecting another Star Wars film at 5 months later. mean, usually people had to wait 3 years for each film, and then it was shortened down to 2, but then it was actually shortened to 1 with the spin-offs. So yeah, I just don't think that it was a very smart move to do that. I mean, people say that they're talking about Star Wars fatigue. I don't really think that's it. I think it's just more about changing the trends that people are used to with Star Wars, and just simply like it felt like it was being thrown out there. That's kind of what it felt like to me, especially with all the behind the scenes issues. Like I really wanted to see what Lord and Miller's version of that was, but you know they got tossed aside, and then they brought in Ron Howard to finish the film. Like I have nothing. I'm not saying that anything bad about how Ron Howard handled the film, but like I understand like Lord and Miller would bring something completely new to the Star Wars franchise, and like what you were saying, like Johnson did a lot of stuff that not a lot of fans would agree with. I will say that if he did do like a spin-off, like let's say his idea of the Jedi was set like in the KOTOR era, yeah, I'd want to see that film, but I wouldn't want it to be with the characters I already grew up with. I think those characters, you know, should just be who they are, not what he wants them to be. I mean, yeah, sure, these characters may change, but I just when I go back and I watch the Last Jedi, and then I go back and I watch Return of the Jedi, and I look at Luke, I just don't see them as the same character. Like you can't really honestly expect me to just believe that. That's why I think people are having such a hard time with it. It's that I think it really is all about Luke. I think Luke is the biggest one, and I feel that if you change his character in such a negative direction, you're going to get a negative response as a result. I mean, sure, people change and they might have to go through some trials, but you can't go and say, no, this time it won't work. I don't just don't see why that needed to happen. Like I said, I would have preferred if it was in like if they did like a KOTOR film or whatever and they challenged it, because that's primarily the same with KOTOR too. And people actually fondly remember KOTOR too, even though it was also like a dark film for the Jedi. But you know, it did new things, and now it is fondly remembered. I'm not sure that same can be said about The Last Jedi in the long run. Some people might say that they just took the lore and thought it just needed to work a different way than what people saw. I mean, it just seemed like the whole film was all about subverting expectations. I mean, certainly that's what it did, but if your whole film is about subverting expectations, then really what's the like what are we supposed to expect? That's just all I can say about that. Should we move on?
Yeah. So, what do you guys think? What are your expectations for Episode 9, and what do you guys think about the two trilogies that have been announced that are supposedly in the works?
Now, for episode 9, here's what I worry about, because you know Abrams is directing this film, and he directed the episode 7. So it's like, you know, he did the opening chapter and the ending chapter, but the whole middle chapter is nothing like his beginning. And he has to try and retroactively like tell the story he was trying to tell, but he can't tell that story anymore. I think he's been severely limited by what's happened.
That's
Like he,
true. It's a interesting situation.
like I like explain what I mean. Like I just don't really like. Let's say you were talking about your book. Let's say you wrote like the first 4 chapters of that book, and you had this outline. You couldn't write the next 3 chapters, but you gave out the basic outline to someone, and that person threw that outline away, and then you're expected to tell the last 3 chapters of that story, even though what's happened afterwards is nothing like the story you were writing beforehand. So now you have to try and retroactively like fix your story or tell the story you wanted to tell. I mean, it's in a bad space anyway. And I think a lot of like you guys remember the Star Trek reboots, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The first film did pretty well, but it was generally well received. But then the second film, Into Darkness, wasn't that very well received, and it did a little better. But then when the third film came out, even though it was actually a pretty good film, nobody went to see it. So it didn't matter that it was Star Trek, or it didn't matter there was a third film in that series. It's just there was so much negativity or bad press from the previous film that the third film ultimately suffered. Now they'll say this is the conclusion of the trilogy, the conclusion of the entire Skywalker saga, but it felt like they already wrote that conclusion in the last film. They already killed like the big bad guy in the second movie, and they also. It's just I don't really know what to expect anymore.
Was he the big bad guy though?
Well, here's the thing, and this is why I think it was important that you don't just throw away a big character like that, because you have the original 6 films, and they're all about telling this story that leads to them, balancing the force, bringing things back the way it should be. And then this character out of nowhere undoes all of that. And then all of a sudden he's dead without any explanation. Like, well, so what was the whole point of all of this till now? Like, why did I watch these characters go through all this only for them to lose it all, and yet the person who was behind it all we know nothing about and probably will never learn anything about? I mean, will we learn about it in the ninth film? Like, I mean, maybe, but is there any point now? Like,
I think it'll be mainly about the character arcs of the protagonists of Kylo Ren, and like the joining, possibly the joining of the light and dark in the 9th film. I don't know.
Like that's another thing I always considered, like the idea of a synthesis of the whole light and dark. Could they ever really coexist? I mean, I've been open to see something like that actually happen. I mean, it seems like they were going for something like that when they were talking about, Kylo Ren's development. Like he's a conduit of both the light and the dark side. But that might still happen. I don't know how they're going to go with that, but it's like it's all up to JJ now, and I'm sure he's going to do his best, but I think there's so much stigma now from The Last Jedi that people might not even give it a shot. I mean, that's what worries me. Like, I'm not saying that's what will happen, but I'm just saying there's just so much stigma from not just the Last Jedi, but also the response from the people who worked on it. Just it's like it's not really rubbing people the right way.
Well, I agree that it's in a bad situation right now just because of The Last Jedi and how many things were wrong with it. But given the current situation, don't you think that Abrams would be the person to kind of spin it around into a new light with the next film?
Only if he did some kind of cosmic reset that undid everything in The Last Jedi. Then, yeah. I mean, that's all I can say. There's just too much, there's too much stuff that's been undone by that film that I can't imagine how could he scale back and tell the actual story he wanted to tell. He's just there's so much stuff limited now.
What was that story?
I don't know. Maybe he didn't have that. Like maybe he did this whole big mystery box thing. It's a big mystery box, and someone else had to open it or unravel it.
What do you think, Kurt?
Yeah, so this is an interesting situation because like I said before, with The Force Awakens, J.J. Abrams, he's a man of mystery, and he likes to set certain things up that will have payoff later on. And I thought that watching The Force Awakens, I really liked the concept of Snoke. I thought he was an interesting character, and I think I had a slight bias because it was it was Andy Serkis behind him. but I was interested to learn how he, played into, is it the greater scheme of things? How maybe in, was it before the Last Jedi came out? Like, would we learn more about him and his training of Kylo Ren? What kind of powers he had, blah 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 blah, that kind of thing. And obviously, there was the whole palaver going on behind, like, is it Rey's parentage? Oh, is she related to Obi-Wan? Is she like a Skywalker? Blah 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 blah. And one of the things I did like about The Last Jedi is that they did say, oh yeah, she's no one. I wouldn't have minded if she was someone or not. I could go either way, but the fact that she was no one didn't bother me that much. What bothered me was the handling of Snoke, because I think, was it their the way in which it was done, it was just, well, his death in general was just so meh to me. But also the fact that you would set up this character just to have him dismissed, and it was part of this whole thought process that, is it mysteries that set up don't have to have big payoff. Certain things can just be, and certain things can just be, is it swept under the carpet if they don't have like a what do you call it? I guess a big, if they're not part of the bigger picture that the person is working on, then they could just like throw some of their stuff aside. But it was just annoying that this film, for all the things that it did right, it also just took so many of the foundations of the Force Awakens and then just chose to, just take a dump on it or throw it into a volcano and act like it didn't exist. So now we're just in this really precarious position where it's done some things right, but it's ultimately almost ruined like at least 2 out of 3 of the main characters. Poe and Finn were in these really interesting positions to become even greater characters in the sequels, and they've ultimately turned Finn into a boring character and Poe into this crazy hothead man who, only occasionally does something cool, but mostly just gets told off for being too reckless. And Rey, while she definitely had like, some pretty decent character development, it makes her look like even more of a more powerful person than before. Which, depending on who you talk to, that could either be a good or bad thing. But now JJ, as much as I like the guy, I am curious to see what he'd do with this film, because yeah, the Last Jedi was darker in tone than the previous film, and there were so many things that would change and handle. I wonder if he'd be able to find a way to sort of guide the tone back into, I guess, a lighthearted kind of way, or stick with it, or find a balance between the two. I think he has the power to do it, but I've never seen him handle a franchise that had such a, I guess, connective tissue. Because even though he did Mission Impossible 3, that film didn't really have that much of a tie to Mission Impossible number 2. It was almost, you could almost argue it was own self-contained kind of film, to be honest. But there's so many possibilities of ways in which this film could go. I just hope that they do right by the newer characters. And if they are going to bring Phasma back in some way, shape, or form, which would be pointless now because they've had 2 attempts and they've done goofed twice, I just want them to do something fun, something consistent, something that makes sense within the universe, and not try too many crazy stunts.
Maybe he could do what he did with Star Trek and have them go through a time vortex and just go back to the beginning and have them go into an alternate reality where none of it actually happened.
That would
that is the solution.
I mean,
that's true. That.
To see alternate universes in Star Wars would be a first. Yeah. Whether that would sit well with the greater Star Wars fandom would be like a totally different story altogether.
In fact, I think that's kind of what Rian Johnson's trilogy is supposed to be about. Like, he says he just wants to make a completely new Star Wars universe, not just expand on stuff that's before, but like something that's never been done before. It's like, so if you're making it completely new and without anything before, how is it Star Wars? And I don't know, maybe this alternate timeline thing could work. I don't know. It just feels, I don't know if it's gonna happen. But if he did his own trilogy with his own cast of characters, with his own ideas that, didn't go with anything that's come before, yeah, that could probably work. But like, I think a lot of people just really don't like Ryan Johnson right now because of what he did to in the Last Jedi. What he like, because here's the thing, he didn't just have to tell this story. Like, it was his story. He wrote the story. Everything in this was all him. I mean, sure, he had probably other people giving him ideas, but you know, he probably had about as much direct control over it as George Lucas did with the prequels, or even JJ with The Force Awakens. But I mean, it feels like there has to be some kind of limit put on there of what can change. But I mean, if this trilogy happens, I have no idea what he's going to do, because apparently it's going to be something completely different to whatever we've seen before. Maybe there'll be some familiar elements, but that'll probably be it. Maybe something will pick up from there, but I'm really not sure if it's going to happen. Like I said, people see Ryan Johnson as the guy who broke and destroyed Luke Skywalker. I mean, he went from he was going on this like this journey, this mystical journey in which he left a map behind for people to find him, to I just went to this place to die and I didn't want anyone to find me, and I don't know how you found that map. I mean, that's literally what happened.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy.
I mean, because I think, I mean, like, what's the deal with the map? If he didn't want to be found, why is there a map?
Yeah, just the more you talk about this, the more it just starts to, the cogs in my brain start to turn, and I'm just
doesn't quite work.
Yeah,
it's just not working out.
This Ryan Johnson trilogy, I was curious about it when it was announced, because it was just before The Last Jedi came out. I was like, okay, I'm interested. Again, I've seen Ryan Johnson's previous work, and I know that he's, solid as a filmmaker. And I'm still partially interested in what he'd be able to do, as long as it was put in a period of Star Wars that just had no connection to, is there anything that we're aware of? I mean, obviously, show some familiar elements, maybe, come to a certain part of the universe that we're familiar with. But if he wants to do something completely new, just leave it far away from any of the characters that we know of. Maybe handle some of the races of characters that we are aware of within the series, but just tamper with it in like a totally different way. But as long as it just has nothing to do with the core foundations of Star Wars, because I don't think anybody wants him near it right now. I feel like he's in the same position that Shane Black was in when Shane Black did Iron Man 3, and the Marvel fans revolted against him because of what he did with that series. So yeah, man, Ryan Johnson, I think if he's going to do that new trilogy, it will probably be a little ways off. I think they might just, I wouldn't say put it on, probably put it on hold, not probably cancel it outright, unless we do get an announcement in the next year or so that that's been dismissed. But the Game of Thrones people, handling like, some Star Wars films, that's, I think, definitely going to be more, engaging for, I guess, the fans, especially Game of Thrones fans, especially with the new season coming to an end next year as well. So I guess when that's over, Disney might make an announcement or something like that, while the striking while the iron's hot, with everybody talking about Game of Thrones, I guess.
That would be awesome, because we'd have Star Wars, except the characters actually die, unlike The Last Jedi.
Yeah, except at the wrong time.
Oh,
and pointlessly. Did you? Just before we go back to Game of Thrones stuff, I will say also, my last note on Ryan Johnson is that, as much as people say that he was trying to make the best film he possibly could make, I can't help but feel like this was the kind of response he wanted. Because have any of you guys seen that interview from like 10 years ago, where he said that he'd like to make a film where people can say that they really really love the film, but other people could say they really hate the film, and that's the kind of film he wants to make. And well, this is his magnum opus.
I think I did remember reading something about that in an interview, and I'm like, well, well done. Yeah, there you go.
I mean, yeah, that's a thing. So people are thinking like he wanted this to happen. If he said those words that long ago and this is the result, then, what else can we say? Like, maybe this is what he want. I don't know, but he actually got that. He can actually say he did exactly what he said he was going to do, which is I got to give him at least credit for that.
I feel like you could make The Last Jedi a better film by re-editing it and just cutting out the little details that make it bad, you know?
Yeah, cut out Luke's body dissolving at the end.
Yeah.
and maybe have Snoke sort of just teleport out of the room instead of being skewered.
And cut before Leia comes back to life.
Oh yeah, and have Admiral Akbar do the whole light speed crash thing, because that would be epic.
That would have been lovely.
I mean, people are saying, "Oh yeah." I mean, I thought it was odd that they killed Akbar, like off screen,
Yeah.
sort of. I mean, everybody knows the guy is a national treasure. He's a meme treasure. That's what he is. I mean,
he's arguably more important than Luke Skywalker.
Yeah, because he tells everyone that apparently things aren't going so well.
Exactly.
So Kathleen Kennedy got her contract renewed, and a lot of fans are having backlash against that. And I was wondering, what do you guys think about all that backlash against her? Do you think it's justified? Because I'm thinking more like she's being used as a scapegoat, because as we just discussed, like, of course I guess she has veto power in a sense, but I mean, it's not like she personally is making all of these changes that fans are unhappy about. What do you guys think?
I think it's more due to the fact that it's not that she's making these changes herself or she's making all these decisions herself. It's that she's not making any decisions in regards to regards to the Star Wars story. Like, sure, she's like probably a pretty competent producer. She has to be to do something as big as Star Wars, but I feel like she shouldn't have like the overall like story control like she has. I think it's more like if I think what would be great if she wanted to do the producing role, that's fine. I think a lot of people are saying that Dave Filoni should be head behind the story, all the story groups, because he's like the biggest Star Wars fan ever, and he's making all these Star Wars shows. Like, he made the Clone Wars, he made Rebels, and he's always talking about how he wants to honor the whole what's come before and all. And I joke with my friends before about like what would happen if Filoni was in charge during Rian Johnson's role, and if he heard his treatment and of the story and of Luke Skywalker, he probably would have said to Johnson, "You're fired." I mean, I figure that's what he would do, because I always hear about what he talks about in regards to Luke and where his character is, and he probably wouldn't agree with it. And it's ultimately not up to him. But I feel like it's because it's up to her that all these things are happening, but she's not really doing, like, she doesn't really do enough press for the films. Like, she kind of does leave it. I think she did like a lot of press up until The Last Jedi came out, and then she's kind of been quiet a bit until Solo came out. I haven't really been keeping up with all the stuff she's been doing. But I think one of the problems people are having with this is not just the fact that she's, vetoing everything, but also like a lot of people who work at Lucasfilm right now, like, have their jobs because of Kathleen Kennedy. So it's more like they're only there because she's there, and if she was ousted, or if she was let go or whatever, that they might lose, half their staff, which they can't afford. So that might be one reason for that happening. If so, it's a pretty genius strategy, I gotta say, to keep control of Lucasfilm. But I don't think she's gonna have as much control over like all the Star Wars license as she did before. I think there's been some talk about how other people are saying that they want to try and have her reign in control or do something else But really, I don't think that really much is going to change. I just think that yeah, it's going to go on for 3 more years, but I think it's just giving them time to prepare for what's to come after. I mean, she's going to finish off this sequel trilogy, and maybe uh, there'll be some projects lined up in the regards that will come after her. But I really don't think she might stay on after these 3 years are up. I don't even know if she's going to stay on like for the whole 3 years. Something else might happen. Like I just think it all depends on episode 9, and if that if that doesn't do well, like if it's the lowest grossing film of the trilogy, then they'll say it's a failure, or at least it's as close to a failure as it can be.
Failure by Star Wars standards, anyway.
Well, I mean, like Solo lost money, so there's and that's never happened before, and it happened on her watch. Yes,
Right.
The Force Awakens made $2 billion, but I think that was just going to happen no matter what. Well, I think
that was mainly due to just the fact that there hadn't been another film out for 10 years.
exactly. That's what I mean. Like that was always going to make money, and so was The Last Jedi, despite what people were saying. Like I already heard about the criticisms of The Last Jedi, but I didn't even listen to the criticism because I wanted to see the film myself. So that's really my take on it. It took me a while before I really started to understand what the criticism was. I didn't get The Last Jedi when I first saw it. I thought about it, and then I started, oh yeah, this does suck. But as far as Kathleen Kennedy goes, I really don't have much to say about it. She's just not. I just think that maybe the person who should take her job is someone who really loves Star Wars, and I don't think she loves Star Wars.
I think you're right, Adam. I think maybe what we have here is the case of they've hired somebody who's a really good producer. And of course, to be a producer, you're basically a business person. So she's a good businesswoman, but she's not necessarily a hardcore fan.
But here's the thing. Here's why I think that you need to, in order for the story to be great and everything to flow naturally, is to be a fan. I mean, like, look at the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Kevin Feige is one of the biggest comic book nerds ever, and he's a producer. And yet he's been able to make a 20-film series for 10 years, and it's made like billions and billions of dollars. I mean, that's just goes to show that to have a good producer, but also an avid fan, is a great combination for making films. And I think even Feige wanted to throw his hat in the Star Wars ring as well, because he's a major Star Wars fan too. So I'm thinking, if they wanted to keep Kathleen Kennedy as a producer, fine. But if they want to have someone running the story, get someone who's a big story guy. Get Dave Filoni to do it. I mean, he was already working with George Lucas for years before all this happened. So he's probably the best guy for it. I mean, George Lucas called him his freaking Padawan. What more could you say?
Yeah, the interesting thing about Kathleen Kennedy to me is that she's literally been there, well, at least before The Last Jedi and Solo happened. She was there throughout the Star Wars film successes. So obviously everyone was looking to her, thinking that she had made the right call on all these different films, and she was obviously the person there partly responsible for making all of these financial successes happen for the Star Wars franchise, and obviously Disney as well. Now, obviously, with The Last Jedi happening and, her being pretty much near the top of the chain when it came to, getting final approval of everything, obviously, people pointing fingers at Rian Johnson, but also at her because she allowed it to, happen, essentially. And obviously, with the way in which Solo ended up, flopping financially, having, at least half of the people that saw the film say that it was like the worst thing ever and offended their childhoods and blah 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 blah. People were just like, is it not very happy with her? And I thought that I wouldn't say that she was going to get fired, but I thought that they might rein her in or have at least some sort of announcement of someone else possibly coming in just to help steer the ship. But obviously she had a 3-year extension, and I think that's primarily due to what she was able to do in terms of the financial success for the franchise, bar obviously the Solo film. I think that yes, it definitely helps to have a fan of the franchise who knows the source material inside and out to help at least steer the ship at the top. You need someone that has that sort of vision, that fundamental understanding of what makes Star Wars fun and interesting for people of all ages. And I feel like Dave Filoni, while he obviously hasn't made a film yet, I feel like his creative vision on what happened with obviously Clone Wars and Rebels, he has a very good understanding of what makes Star Wars fun and interesting. Ask most people that saw the Clone Wars and Rebels show. Obviously, Rebels probably less so just because there's less episodes, and that show can get a little kid friendly and a little silly at times. But when the show worked, it was fabulous. And he, at the top level, at least with the films, I feel like he would be able to, course correct this franchise into new and interesting directions with that nostalgic feel, but also pushing things forward in an interesting manner. And it would be nice to have someone like him up at the top, or at least someone that can find a way to just guide this series forward without just thinking of it from a financial point of view, I guess.
So what is your overall opinion, guys, on the state of the Star Wars franchise? Because what happens with a lot of franchises is they start off with one creator who's passionate, in this case George Lucas, and it starts off really well and has humble beginnings, and then kind of takes off, and then it grows and grows as a franchise, and then aspirations to do it new and improved and make a lot of money kick in, and more people get involved. And that's been the case now. We've had Disney come in. We've had people who, weren't obviously in it to begin with. A lot of new people have come in to have their creative mark on the franchise, and whether for good or for bad or for both or for both, it changes. So how do you guys feel like the Star Wars franchise is going? And we'll start with you, Damien.
I mean, I'm certainly happy that there are new Star Wars films being made. Sorry, let me start over real quick for recording. I'm certainly happy that there's new Star Wars films being made, but I feel like at a certain point, the goal to make more money with larger productions like they are now, it starts to take hold of the story, as we were talking earlier with The Last Jedi versus The Force Awakens. The differences in like the quality of story and the direction of that story could have been guided more in the sense of, let's go with a script that we think will make more money rather than what will make more sense for the story itself. I think as of right now, with different contributors, different directors, for a trilogy like this, like it has been with The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi, it might not work as well because you have conflicting opinions, conflicting ideas, trying to work in the same story. I don't think that works out as well. But with the individual films I've made, like Rogue One and Solo, I think it works better because those are self-contained stories. And I found that just with the newer films, I've enjoyed those more rather than the sequels that they're trying to produce right now with The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi.
That's a really good point, Damien. Actually, if I can interrupt you briefly, I was actually thinking, like, because they're announcing, these two new trilogies, and one of the criticisms of the prequel trilogy was that it had to be 3 episodes because obviously in, I think, 81, they rebranded the original Star Wars as Episode 4: A New Hope, and so they had to have then Episodes 1, 2, and 3, and Episode 3 had most of the backstory that was essential anyways. Episodes 1 and 2 partially felt like filler, and so I was wondering if you think that maybe it's just like what triggered this thought, Damien, was when you said the standalone films are working better, and I was thinking maybe actually announcing that there'll be trilogies is a bit too ambitious and can trap themselves. Of course, it's a moneymaker, so maybe that's what they're thinking as well. And of course, there is a tradition of having trilogies in Star Wars, but maybe instead of talking about let's plan trilogies, especially because we don't know exactly how much content they have in mind for 3 films each, maybe do standalone films.
I mean, I think they'll probably continue on. I don't know exactly what they have planned, but they'll probably continue on with the trilogies and standalone films alongside, like they have done. I think what will be different in the future is that they're planning on having the same director, Rian Johnson, correct?
For his trilogy, yeah. I don't know about the Game of Thrones one. But what I meant was, like, instead of announcing, okay, there's going to be a Rian Johnson trilogy, maybe just say there's going to be a new Rian Johnson spin-off film, and then based off if that one is working, they have good ideas, then you can announce, okay, there'll be a sequel and another sequel. But instead, like, by saying it's going to be a trilogy, they're committing themselves to 3 films at the get-go. And what if they don't have what it takes to make 3 consistently good films?
I remember you were saying, though, earlier, David, about having different directors for a single trilogy may not always be the best idea, but just remember, though, that the original trilogy had 3 different directors. George Lucas directed the first film, or the 4th film, Star Wars: A New Hope, and then the following 2 films had different directors. The only difference was that George Lucas was the one writing the script, or at least he was producing the films and he had written most of what was going to happen in those stories. Obviously, other people took different directions on board. Like the films were done in a different way because, they would have done things that George Lucas wouldn't have done. I think the reason why I like Empire so much is because of the set designs. I think they're one of the best designs in Luke's first duel with Vader. That's actually one of my favorite sets in the whole series, because it's on this stage, it's on this. But it's all the lighting around it. It feels very real. So in regards to having different directors, and it comes down to, as long as there is a consistent flow of the story, you could bring other people along to tell that same story. It's just you can't have them decide, oh, this doesn't work for my story, so I'll just pretend that never happened, or I'll just ignore that. I mean, that's one of the issues that people face. And, fans, they really, they always pick up on this stuff because, these people, they read these stories. They look at all the background extras. I mean, you remember you were saying about, how all those characters in the films probably have their own backstories. I mean, they just released this book called From a Certain Point of View, which is basically just that. It's the story of all those background extras and what they were doing during that film. So, yeah, I mean, having those different directors on board can work because they can give something new, but you have to make sure that there is a consistent chronology with the story, and that's why I think people have this kind of backlash with The Last Jedi, because it doesn't feel like that the chronology is consistent. Like I said, when that film, when The Last Jedi opened, Luke looks like a Jedi, but then he just takes off his robes in the next scene because he's not supposed to be a Jedi in this film, because the ending of the last film had him as a Jedi, or was supposed to be a Jedi. So I just think that if you're going to tell your own story, fine, but you have to be prepared to adjust your story so that it can be consistent with the last story. Or if you just want to tell your own story, make it a spin-off film, make it a completely new film, whatever. If Rian Johnson wanted to do his own film in the series, do his own trilogy, it could have been set in the Old Republic era where where all that stuff was really grim and dark or whatever. Like I said, KOTOR 2 is one of my favorite games, and it's set in a very dark time, and it works because it's not really changing anything in the main Star Wars line. It's just developing the story from back then. I mean, sometimes some say it might not matter because it's so long ago, but it can, people can take elements from those stories and incorporate them into the new ones as well, because it's still the same world, it's the same universe. So if people wanted to go and tell their own story, that's great. I'm looking forward to seeing how this Jon Favreau's Mandalorian series is going to turn out, because I really like the Mandalorians. I like their warrior culture, and I want to see how that actually shows, because so far the only real exposure we've had to Mandalore has been in the Clone Wars, Rebels, and the little bit of that we saw from Boba Fett. He's supposed to be a Mandalorian. So I'm curious as to see what they do with that.
Yeah. For
do you have any? I'm sorry. Do you have any final thoughts, Damien?
I have to head out soon, so that's why he keeps jumping to me, just so you guys know. But yeah, I completely agree with you, Adam, that there can certainly be multiple directors in a trilogy or a series of films, and still have a consistent story. It certainly didn't work in this case. And I wasn't saying like as a whole that you can't have different directors and different films within a series of films, but I think within this certain scenario, it would be better to have the same director for the 3 films, at least with what we've seen with Rian Johnson. Rian Johnson wants to tell his own story, and I think the only way that he can do that is if he has his own self-contained trilogy, or even better, his own self-contained single film, like you were talking about, Alex.
Right. Any other final thoughts, guys? Damien, Kurt, Adam?
Yeah, I just wanted to contribute. My final thoughts on this is simply like Damien, I'm happy to see that Star Wars is back in the public consciousness again. Sort of like similar, but not quite, but similar to the way in which Star Trek was, was it pretty much like on no one's radar at all. J.J. Abrams helped, as he revitalized that franchise, and he sort of did the same for Star Wars. Now, Star Wars obviously was still relevant in a way, obviously, because of the Clone Wars show and some of the expanded universe material here and there. But it was pretty much the dark ages of the franchise where everybody would just go on about how great the original films were and cursed the days that the prequels ever got made, and pretty much just said so many horrible things about George Lucas for years and years and years. So with Disney, what I'm thankful for is that they at least gave the franchise a whole new lease on life. There's been some pretty good book material released, all of which I've not read, but I've heard some interesting things. I do really like The Force Awakens. I love Rogue One. There's still elements that I do like about The Last Jedi, even, considering my many grievances with it. And Solo was fun as well. So the thing is, all they really need to do is slow down. Think about what they're doing beforehand. Stop all this crazy committee foolishness and just understand the core essentials of what makes Star Wars fun. The stories, the world, and the characters. And, somehow venture away from, was the familiar and try to go new, but obviously try to keep it within that sort of Star Wars feel. Maybe give Dave Filoni a little bit more power in terms of, just guiding the franchise, just being able to give out helpful, tips. I'm really looking forward to The Mandalorian. It looks like fun. And Jon Favreau, he hasn't let me down yet. Once again, I'm curious to see what happens with the Rian Johnson trilogy. I'm curious to know what's going to happen with the Game of Thrones stuff. Those guys can make magic happen. So let's hope that they do that for their new material in Star Wars. And Episode 9, I just want it to be good. That's all I'm hoping for. I just need a nice balance between old and new, and I think we'll be fine. And obviously just give a little bit more space between the films, basically, and that'll be good.
One thing I just really hope that they do is that they actually, take the criticism and don't ignore it. They have to learn from it. It's just if they go ahead and just not accept it, that the last few films, or just The Last Jedi really has, causes a lot of problems. They have to take that on board and just accept what they were doing might not have worked, and they can learn from that. If they're going to keep making Star Wars films, and if they're going to stumble, it's better to stumble at the beginning than to just keep stumbling and never learning how to move on from it. I really just want them to stop, blaming the fans. The fans just, they like Star Wars, they love Star Wars, and you can't just blame them for, the faults of what's happening to them. Solo didn't do so well. Well, they're slowing down production now. They're trying to just focus on the trilogy films now. They're just focusing on Episode 9, and they're going to try and do whatever they want. They're going to be doing the Game of Thrones stuff, but it's probably going to take it's probably just going to go a different direction now. They might keep on. I hear they're probably going to keep on the actors from the sequel trilogy, and they'll probably move on to other films. They probably won't be. It probably won't be another trilogy, but it might be something else. I just want them to, take the criticism on board, and just accept that, they can make mistakes, and like they're like, and I do enjoy the prequels as well because I grew up with them. And I look back on them and I think, yeah, there are some problems. Sure, I like Attack of the Clones is my least favorite film, but that's not to say that like there aren't good that can come out of it. I mean, like it's because of that we have the Clone Wars TV series, and now that's coming back now, and people are really really excited about that. I'm excited about it. I want to see how that story finally ends because we never got that. Now we are. You know, I actually did watch the first few episodes of Resistance because you know I was actually curious, and I'll just say, you know, it's not doing any harm, but I do think that you know trying to do the way it was advertised just didn't do it any favors, and not to mention it came after the reveal of the Clone Wars return. So I won't say, I'll just say it's not bad. It's probably going to be good for, you know, a younger audience. But I think like having it on at like Sunday at 10 p.m. is well, stupid because kids have to go to school the next day. I'm just saying if you're going for a younger audience, put it at a time that audience can actually watch it. Otherwise, who's it for? Because it's like it's probably not from like I don't know. I'll just keep. I might not. I don't know if I'll keep watching it, but I'll just take a look at it just to see how it develops. Because you know, Rebels and Clone Wars, you know, they had their rough starts. I mean, Clone Wars probably had the roughest start when you know it was released as a movie. Not everybody liked Ahsoka Tano. Now everybody loves Ahsoka Tano. They want to see more of her, and you know that kind of thing can happen. So, you know, there can be a lot of good that can come from something bad. Even you know, even the Last Jedi. I don't know how Abrams is going to turn it around. I'd love to see him turn it around. I'd like him to just make it, you know, the story he wanted to tell, or like the story that you know we want. Like when I say the story we want, but one that we can really love and appreciate. I can't really say I can say that about The Force Awakens, and I may not like everything about it, but I'm glad that film is the way it is. And sometimes, you know, you have to just look back and say, you know, they had a good start there. They stumbled in the middle, and maybe they can have a great end. And that's kind of like what happened with the prequel films. Like the first film, you know, not everyone likes, or the Phantom Menace, not everybody likes that film. I still like that film, even though I know there's problems with it. The second film, I don't really like that much, but you know, it's just them still building on what they did in the last film, and that we got the Clone Wars out of that, and Revenge of the Sith. You know, is one of my favorite Star Wars movies like ever. I think I put it behind, you know, like The Empire Strikes. I think it's probably my third, maybe my second favorite because it's well, aside from Rogue One, actually, I should probably put Rogue One in there. I put Rogue One as my second favorite Star Wars film, behind Empire. So yeah, I mean, there's still a lot of good that can come out of it. And it seems like Disney is starting to learn their lessons because they're slowing down because they were rushing the films out. And you know, I'd like to see Dave Filoni have more creative control over all this stuff. But you know, because it seems like he knows. But you know, we'll just have to see what happens. And I'll just say that I still like the Star Wars expanded universe. I still read the books. I still play. Well, I don't play the games because they're being made by EA and they're just trying to. They're doing even worse money making stuff. But you know, I'll still play the games that I played before. I still play KOTOR too. So I just want to say that I'm glad they're still making films, but I want them to just make like films we can all enjoy and appreciate, and just say that yeah, that's a great addition to this universe.
Yeah, really good points, Adam. And well, guys, thanks so much for a really good discussion today on Star Wars. It was a blast. Thank you, Adam, Kurt, and Damien. Do you guys have any last thoughts you'd like to share before we wrap up today's episode?
I think we all know what the last word should be, but I'll let Kurt say it.
Oh no! Please don't throw that to me. I want you to say it.
Okay.
Do you have anything you'd like to say, Kurt, before Adam says it?
Well, yeah, just thanks for listening, ladies and gentlemen, and gents, this has been fun doing, and I'm just looking forward to the new season of the Imagine podcast. This is going to be fun.
Yeah, check us out on social media, SoundCloud, iTunes. Follow us. We have a lot of new episodes and discussions planned. It's gonna be a blast. So, Adam, take it away.
The Force will be with you always.